Welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. If your job involves working with or influencing people's behavior, this podcast offers invaluable insights into what makes people tick. Through personal interviews that are thoughtful and surprising, we explore the full range of the roots to people smarts that can help you make or break your own career. My name is Marie Gervais, and with a PhD in culture and learning in the workplace and my own cultural journey, I bring the mysteries of human beings at work around the world to you. Through conversations with very diverse people, examining the groups they were born into and the ones they chose to belong to, my podcast takes a deep dive into why people do what they do and how they belong. Hone your skills to manage others and to be a better human being at work with the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. And now for today's episode. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I am really excited to introduce to you Father Raldy Jhack Diaz, who has a really interesting story. I'd love to hear more about it. He is the first Filipino priest to be ordained in the Diocese of St. Paul, Alberta, which is a small rural community in the north of the province where I live. And he is currently the pastor of a Catholic church in Mallaig, a tiny little town. And he probably has some things that he can relate to in that, even though he's from a different country, because he was a country boy raised by farmer parents and lived in abject poverty, which was the biggest dragon he fought. Education was the weapon he used to fight against it. He entered the seminary at the age of 17 and after many long years of patient waiting, received his ordination into the priesthood at the age of 35. I have lots of questions about that. He brought with him his personal battle cry, which is blessings delayed but not denied. I have not yet interviewed a priest on the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast, and I'm really excited to do it. So welcome, Father Jhack.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marie.
Tell me a little bit about who you are, your family growing up and how you ended up coming into Canada.
Yeah, well, my name is Father Raldy Jhack Diaz, otherwise known as Father Jhack. I am a 7-year-old priest, and as what you have mentioned in the introduction, I was ordained at the age of 35 at St. Paul Cathedral here in St. Paul, Alberta, Canada, by our former Bishop Emeritus Paul Tario. I was the first Filipino priest ordained in the diocese, and I came from the southern part of the Philippines in the province of Bukidnon in the beautiful island called Mindanao. I don't know if some of your listeners have been to the Philippines, but as a side note, Philippines is composed of 7,640 islands, if I'm not mistaken. And the Philippines, our country, is located in the Pacific Ocean near the equator. And it is very interesting that there are like 170 dialects spoken throughout the archipelago, and mostly used were Tagalog and English. And currently, I'm stationed here in a wonderful hamlet here in Mallaig, like 120 miles northeast of Edmonton. And I am a pastor of a Friends community here at St. John de Brebeuf Parish here in Mallaig, Alberta. Addition to my assignment is St. Helen Parish at St. Lina, Alberta. Then I also do Our Lady of Mercy in Kihiwan. It's an indigenous community. I also do the service in Vilna, Alberta, Canada.
You're busy. Yeah. Wow. It is a phenomenon that many church communities have become older and attendance has been declining. And it's been harder and harder for them to find priests, pastors, anybody who would be heading those churches from within North America. And so oftentimes those that are coming to guide those congregations are people from the Philippines and also from Africa. So pretty much all the priests that we're seeing now are coming from the Philippines or coming from different African countries. And they don't have a lot of relation with the people that they are working with in the congregations because it's such a big cultural divide. So I'm really interested in finding out how you've been negotiating that so far.
The mandate of the Lord is to go and spread the good news and evangelize and baptize people in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That was his last word before he ascended into heaven. That was the mandate to the disciples. And I think I'm just the product of the mandate of the Lord to the apostles.
So you are for sure inspired by your faith, and that gives you the courage to move forward in spite of difficulties. But at the same time, people still have to find a way to connect. And the reason I met you is because I attended the 90th birthday celebration mass of my husband's aunt. And you gave a very beautiful sermon. I think had I heard sermons like that when I was growing up, I would have been very much affected. And not only that, but you also dedicated a song to her that you wrote. And you said something that really touched me. And it was that it is lonely to be here without a family. So in order to be in a situation where there isn't family, you have to take refuge in the gifts of solitude. And one of those gifts of solitude was that you started to write songs. And that song was really good. Like, it was not like somebody who's never sung a note before and is just squeaking a few things out. It was a beautiful song. My husband and I are musicians, so we're not saying this for nothing. So it was a beautiful song and it was very touching. And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. I was thinking there are some gifts in solitude, but it's also not easy. So how are you personally dealing with this? I know you have your faith, but how else are you dealing with it? How are you able to connect and find ways to find social connection as well?
I felt like I'm like a monk at home and apostles outside. So it's very challenging to be alone, to be like a hermit. But I firmly believe I'm not alone because, spiritually speaking, the Lord is promising us of His presence and He's telling us that I am with you always. But I think my personality also chives with the community where I am right now, just to be with the people. I always have this kind of philosophy that to live the way they live, that's my philosophy right now in my parish.
Mm-hmm. Also, you come from a farming background.
Correct.
Yeah. And so this is a small rural community where many people are either directly farmers themselves or their relatives are farmers.
Mhm.
So I would think that would also be a point of connection.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to discover the way of living here in my parish. So as a boy raised in the farm, I love to be in the farm. So every time people do the planting, the harvesting, so I told them I'm very interested to be part of your activities. So it was very excited. I mean, it was a very good experience I have before when my first experience riding in a combine, helping people in the farm.
Oh, yeah. That would have been great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they loved it. I spoke to a couple of the people from the celebration that my husband's aunt was, where I saw you, and they said that they feel like you're part of their family because you understand them. And I think this willingness to say, to ride on a combine and be a part of the farming community is certainly endearing to people.
Yeah, and here they call me a rock star. Yeah, they call me a rock star not because I'm famous, but I help them pick rocks. Yeah, we have here in Mallaig, where our community is very famous and known of the haying in the 30s, helping those who have cancer problem and issues. So I help in my available time to prepare the place for that. And one of my contribution is just to pick rocks.
Yeah, yeah. That event is actually very well known throughout the entire province. People come from all over the place. It's called haying in the 30s.
Yes.
And my husband went to it frequently when he was a child and a few times as an adult. I haven't been yet, but some of my extended family have been. And yeah, so it's where you get this chance to experience what it was like to be a farmer in the 30s. So, and now you're a rock star because you're picking rocks to help prepare for that event.
Yeah. They baptized me by that name, but I'm not famous. I'm not a famous guy.
Locally famous for picking rocks.
Yeah.
So let me go back a little bit to your childhood. Can you remember in the Philippines growing up as a boy on the farm, what are a couple of incidents that you think formed you and made you into that person that you are today? They can be happy or sad. It's just something that stands out in your mind as a child.
You know what? I never dreamed of becoming a priest. My humble desire before was to become a physician. I wanted to become a doctor. It was just a dream because my family cannot afford to support my desire. I was born and raised in the farm. I'm a country boy, and being a farmer in the Philippines is, you're very poor. And that's why abject poverty is my public enemy number one. We're financially challenged. Poverty was the face of the dragon I fought with before. But I took poverty as the ladder to elevate me to the pedestal of success. I made poverty as my stepping stone to achieve my desires. I think most Filipino can share with me that kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Priesthood was a product of the piety and the religiosity of my parents, because I remember as a child, we never missed our Sunday obligation as a Catholic. In as much as my memory is concerned, I remember we need to walk 7 to 8 miles per week to attend our church service. And because of that, I was just attracted to the white vestments of our Parish Priest. From a simple attraction, that's where my vocation started. And I told myself how I wish I could also be dressed up in white like our priest. And it happened because I was invited to serve at the altar as a sacristan or knights of the altar. And priesthood was really a gift. because I was given a chance to serve. And at the same time, it is a grace because even though I'm not worthy, God qualifies me. That's it. So my vocation starts from a simple attraction, how I wish to be dressed up in white like our pastor.
You know, it's interesting that you would say that because that reminds me too. I was thinking, as you said, that you're attracted to the white vestments of the priest that you saw, and that was the first sort of point of interest for you. And I think that's true of children a lot. You know, they start with that point and then that takes them into something a little bit deeper. And I remember paying attention to things that people wore or the way they held their hands or the way they spoke and thinking, do I want to be like that? Or is that something I'd like to do too?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if people realize what an influence they have on children in all of these indirect ways.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it started from a simple attraction, but the motivation was like purified because of the seminary formation that I've undergone for very long years. So it's not just a matter of being dressed up in white, but the deeper reason is just to serve, to serve the people of God. And, service is just the reason of my joy.
And is service something that you would say also came from the society around you? Would you say that the Filipino community where you lived was service oriented and your family was service oriented, or is that something you grew into later?
Oh, yeah, because in the Philippines, we have this called bayanihan mentality, where we help each other. So I think it helps me a lot also in the formation of my vocation to the priesthood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So these influences for you when you were growing up would have been your family, would have been your religion. Is there anything else that you think influenced you? I define culture as being any group of people. So it could be a group of friends. It could be something that surrounded you, like maybe farming was an influence. Is there anything else that was part of groups that you grew into when you were born into that community that you think has influenced you now?
In my personal experience, I could say that my parents were a big factor of who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, because the strict discipline I got from my mom, because my mom is a disciplinarian, and the solid faith foundation taught by my parents. I was told to always pray, never stop praying, believe in God, never be ashamed to practice your faith. And besides our situation also as a farmer, so I told myself, I don't like to be a slave of a farm forever. I don't like to be poor forever. I need to go beyond farming. And my way of doing that one is just to be sincere and be serious with my education. So I took education as a ladder, as a stepping stone to get away from the slavery of poverty.
Mm-hmm. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Well, I'm eldest of 5.
Oh, yeah. So you're the oldest and you're also setting the example for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you grew up and you said when you were age 17, you already decided to become a priest. So how come it took 35 years before you became ordained? That seems to me to be a very long trajectory.
I entered the seminary at the age of 17 right after high school. Then after that one, I undergone several seminary formation. I remember I was accepted in the diocese of Mallaig, Bukidnon. That's where the diocese where I belong. Then I was in the seminary for 3 years, but my rector told me to took a regency. Regency is just like a break, just to know more about myself outside the seminary formation.
Mm-hmm.
But my desire for priesthood is I told myself, if I'm going to go out in the seminary, it would be difficult for me to go back. So I told my seminary rector that, I don't support the idea of sending me for a year of, or we call it regency. So instead of leaving the seminary, I look for some seminary to continue my formation. So from the province, I changed my location. I moved into the capital of the country in Manila. So I was accepted in certain religious group, and the group is called Stigmatine Fathers. So I stayed with them for like 12 years because I did my 4 years in philosophy, 4 years in theology, and in the religious life, we have this like some stages of formation. So it was very long, 18 long years, because after my seminary formation, after my theology, unfortunately, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So I need to go out in the seminary to take care of my mom.
Right.
So after 12 years in the seminary, I decided not to continue because I need to take care of my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I worked partially as a teacher, and then at the same time helping my mom in her struggle to fight against cancer. But my mom, she passed away at the age of 54 because of gastric cancer. That's the reason why it took me so long.
Yeah.
Then there was a break. When my mom passed away, I told myself, I'm looking for the meaning of life. So I cannot find it in the life outside the seminary formation and the desire to be a priest. The flame of the vocation of priesthood is still there. There is still a fire. So after 5 years of break, I decided to come back, continue my formation. And I was 35 years old that time. But when I applied in the Philippines, I was not accepted because I remember one of the reason was they're telling me, oh, you're too old, 35.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I remember one of the bishop told me there in one of the application that I had, and he said, "I think you're too old, 35." And there are some reasons also because I came from the province of Bukidnon, so I tried several dioceses to continue my desire to the priesthood, but they're saying you are not from this province, so sorry, we cannot accept you. So some doors were closed for me, and I told myself, well, I really wanted to offer myself to the Lord as a priest. If some of the dioceses are not open to my desire, why not try it outside the country? Since I know and understand English, I tried to apply in several English countries. Like I did send my application in New Zealand, in Australia, in the States, in UK, and also here in Canada. And I was surprised. The first one to accept me was the Diocese of St. Paul. That's why I was here in Canada. I don't have any connections inside and outside the diocese, but God brought me here.
It's very interesting that you would have just been snapped up by that
Mhm.
Canadian rural community.
And you
Yeah.
know what's funny though is this. I remember I was told by one of the bishop in the Philippines, you are too old. But when I was ordained here in St. Paul, you know what? I was the youngest in the
Of
clergy.
course you were the youngest because most
Yeah.
of the priests that are left here are really old.
Yeah.
They're in their 70s and 80s and 90s at this point. Well, that is a great story. I'm really glad that I asked you about it. So you chose to belong to the priesthood, which is a group that you already had familiarity with. Is there anything else? I mean, you're obviously pretty talented as a musician and you're pretty good with studying. I mean, your philosophy and the way that you express yourself is just very lovely to listen to. What would you say you learned as you grew up or was part of your influence of becoming the person that you are now as an adult? What were some of the cultural and leadership influences in your life as you got older?
Well, my leadership style is a servant leadership kind of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
The goal is always to serve because when I was asked, why do you want to become a priest? I remember my answer was to serve the people of God, to serve God. So I'm using my leadership skill to serve a greater good. It's not a micro style controlled by one, but believing in the capacity and the ability of others. So the person of reference is Jesus because he came to serve, not to be served. And I take the lead by example. I here in Mallaig, I do everything. I don't have a cook. I do my own chores. I clean my rectory. I am my own secretary. I don't have my private driver. So it's just like doing it like a servant.
Truly. So I have a burning question for you. And the burning question is, the history of the Catholic Church in Canada is pretty bad. The system of genocide that was applied to the Indigenous peoples in Canada was, in fact, copied by South Africa to create apartheid. That's how bad it is. So it's people saying one thing and doing another. And you are
Mhm.
clearly the opposite. How are you reconciling this?
I am here as a priest to serve the people of God in the Catholic way. And I'm here to love people, not to hate people. So, regardless of what happened in the history, I think the best way is it's hard to say to forget, but I think my deal on that is just to continue to love amidst of the hatred, amidst of the bad history that happened before. Continue to love because love is the weakness of the devil. Because when we love, I firmly believe the devil will melt like snow. So this is, I think, the invitation for all of us to be a person of love, to love and to strike the weakness of the devil. And that is, for me, love, because love is the other name of God.
Yes, love is the attractive force that is the reason we have everything.
Mhm.
And it's how we can get past all of the difficulties that we have in this current stage of the human race's development, for sure. I think it's also, from my perspective, you make a nice bridge because the Indigenous people don't have a bad history with you.
Mhm.
And the small communities, they are longing for something interesting and curious and new that they can latch onto, which would be a first start. But then the way that you relate to them, there's a lot of common background, not just in the farming, but also in this desire to serve.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to relate what you said when you were speaking during this birthday celebration mass that I was at this past weekend. And I thought that this was probably why people love you. I can see why you love them, but I think this is probably why they love you. And it's only just one perspective. And of course, it's only my opinion. But you said you were talking about how important it was to be obedient. And then you said that you were not going to be able to attend the rest of the celebration that you'd been invited to attend because you had to go to an appointment in Edmonton, which was a couple of hours drive away. And you didn't want to go over the speed limit because that wouldn't be obedient. And you had done that in the past. And that caused everybody that was there to burst out laughing because it made you so human. The idea that we're all trying, right? We're all doing something. And I think that that was a lovely way to draw people closer to you, to feel like we're all in this project together.
Yeah, you know what? It's really hard to obey, but as what I've told you in my sermon, obedience is a mark of a wise man.
Of course, yeah. The wiser we get, the more we're likely to understand that. So I'm going to get back to my question list. It's just I'm always so interested in everything you have to say, and it reminds me of something else. So people are born with temperament, which is not that changeable. You have a certain piece to you that's not that changeable, and then you add on to it through overcoming struggles or not being able to, and then being stuck with the consequences of that. So what would you say you were born with? What would people say? Oh, yeah, that's Raldy. He's been like that since he was little. And what would you say you've added on over time, maybe through more wisdom?
I remember during my psychology class that personality trait means the characteristic patterns of thought, patterns of feelings, and patterns of behavior. And based on what I know, personality is a continuum.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
There is a good side and the extreme side. There is a normal side. And in the good side, we called it trait, personality trait. On the extreme side, we called it, personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Based on my psychological assessment, I fall into the category of having I just want to little about myself. I fall into the category of having a histrionic personality trait. What is this histrionic personality trait? Meaning to say, I am life of the party. I love people. I love seeking attention, to be the center of everything. That's my personality. I had a struggle with humility. I have a strong sense of competition. And before I do this as my philosophy in life, that my worth is my work, my value is my achievement. So I'm very insensitive sometimes, like crossing boundaries because of my personality. And priesthood helped me to overcome with my struggle of humility. Modesty aside, I told you education was the ladder I made,
Mm-hmm.
and my weapon to fight against the dragon called abject poverty. So I was never be a number two to anybody before.
Mm.
So I desire to be the first, to be the best or in everything. I'm very competitive, especially in education. So modesty aside, I graduated as the valedictorian in the class. But, after all the awards and everything, compliments, I discovered nothing is on the top, and the top is boring.
And also lonely.
Only in the top.
Yeah.
The world wants competition, but priesthood teaches me to be happy with what I have, to be contented with what I have, because I firmly believe that gratitude is the best attitude. And
I agree. We would have no entitlement if we had only gratitude.
yeah, and because of the formation that I have, it teaches me a beautiful lesson in life, that life is not about having, but our life is defined by being. Life is not about accumulation, but it's all about contribution. It's all about giving, not getting. And
Sounds like that's been able to help you balance your personality. And actually, what made you so interesting to listen to is because of your enjoyment of being in the center of attention, and also the way you have worked to create a logical argument and an interesting progression of ideas. I am a follower of the Baha'i faith. And when I was a child, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and there was no sermon that stood out for me. And there was no priest that ever had an answer for the questions that I had. And I found it extremely frustrating that they would not prepare their sermons properly. And when I heard yours, I thought, you know what? This man knows what he's talking about. He has a sound understanding of the principles. He's presenting them in an exciting, interesting, and personalized way. He's engaging. He's got dramatic flair. People need this. This is what inspires people to move forward in their lives. And to balance that with humility is probably the best, because otherwise it becomes really everything all about me, which gets to be very much a problem after a while, right? And someone who's nothing but humble, nobody has any reason to want to turn to them because they can't see any personality in them, right? Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
But you know what? In my life as a priest, it's not all about me. It's all about Jesus. That's why I told you with my personality before, I have a struggle with humility. That's why the gospel teaching teaches me how to not to be the life of the party, but to be like Saint John the Baptist, saying that God must increase and I must decrease.
So let me ask you a little bit about cultural dissonance. You spoke initially about moving from your local rural community to Manila. Well, that's got to be a shock because we're talking rural to urban. That's one spot. Moving from one diocese to the next. And then there's that whole piece about dealing with cancer and working with the medical people. And, all of that's a whole experience with dissonance too. I thought I understood a lot about sickness and death until I watched my mother die of cancer. And now my father in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's. I now know nothing about sickness and death. It really breeds humility when you face those things. So those are one cultural shock after another every time I go into the Alzheimer's home where my dad is. And then there's also cultural shock from coming to Canada. I mean, there's no way that would have been totally easy and you would have just slid into it with no problems. So can you think of a moment when something just hit you as being, wow, this is very different from what I'm used to?
When I first came here in Canada, I am an alien to winter.
Oh, yeah.
I came from a very tropical country. We have only rainy and sunny season there. So that's one of my shock here. But what is interesting is when I first came here, I remember that was like September 8th of 2015. I arrived in Edmonton at 9 o'clock in the evening. And then my bishop then gave me a ride from Edmonton to St. Paul. It's like a 2 hours drive, right?
Yep.
And what was interesting was when I first came here, I was welcomed colorfully because it was my first time to see the Northern Lights.
Wow. You saw the Northern Lights when you were first coming?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's why I told you I was welcomed colorfully. And I have really a colorful life here. And since then, I was an addict of chasing Northern Lights. And most of my addiction right now is I wake up just to watch the Northern Light. I was, amazed and captivated by the beauty of the Northern Lights.
Oh, it's stunning, isn't it? And you get to see it because you don't have a lot of city lights to block the Northern Lights. So you see it really clearly.
Yeah, that's right. In my life as a priesthood, some people said that, priesthood is abnormal because the trend is to find a partner, right? I received a compliment from someone before. I remember she told me, you are a good husband material. Why renounce having a wife and having a family? But I always go back to the foundation of my motivation. My joy is to serve God in the priestly ministry because priesthood is my treasure of great worth. So I renounce the happiness of having a family for the sake of joy of serving and building God's family on this earth. And even in the Bible, it says that in Matthew 19, chapter 12, some choose to be eunuch. That's the term for the kingdom of heaven's sake. And priesthood is my way of proving my love to Jesus.
But I'm talking about culture shock. So, for example, when I was 18, I went to France for the first time. My husband's family is all from France. And so I went there for the first time, and we went to visit his relatives, his great aunt and uncle that lived in Paris. And they had servants. That was the first time in my life I'd ever seen someone who called themselves a servant. And my husband's great aunt had this woman, she was from Portugal, who was her servant. And she wore this white lace apron and a little white lace hat. And I was in shock just to see that. And then she would ring the bell whenever she wanted this woman to do something for her, even if the woman was standing right next to her. So one time she wanted salt to be brought to the table, which she could easily have gotten up and gotten herself because it wasn't that far. The kitchen was very small. And the servant was standing right next to her. But my husband's great aunt went to the other room, got the bell, sat down, and then rang the bell. And the woman looked at her with complete disdain and said, "Yes, what would you like?" And then the great aunt said, "Salt." That was a complete moment of shock to me because I had never experienced that kind of treatment of other people based on social class. So that really surprised me. And that's just one. I mean, I have many, but that was one where I felt, okay, the way I understand life is not the way everybody understands life. So that's what I'm wondering is, do you have an incident like that?
And I think I remember also one experience,
Mm-hmm.
besides from the experience of winter, it was very cold. And the driving experience I have here in Canada, because driving in the Philippines is totally different from here, right?
Tell me about that.
Yeah. I remember one time I went to Calgary to renew my passport. In the Philippines, when you are on the merged side of the road, you have to give way, you have to yield. But here in Canada, once you are on the merged side, you have to speed up, right?
Yes.
You have to drive fast. Then one time I was on the merged lane, then I yield. People behind me, they're honking and honking and honking, and they were upset why instead of speeding up, I yield, I slow down. Then some people are lost their patience, and sad to say, I received a finger, not the thumbs up, but the middle one.
Yeah.
You know, I was shocked because when he saw me wearing a collar, he was very apologetic. So that was a cultural shock that I experienced here. So I have to study the culture, especially in the driving. I have to follow and obey the rules.
Yeah, driving is sure different everywhere, even from city to city, let alone from country to country.
Mhm.
So this is your soapbox moment. If there's something you would like to promote.
Well, always believe in yourself because I know you have the enormous capacity and ability to bless the world. And to all your listeners right now, this is all I would like to share something, the philosophy that I believe into. I believe that in life there are two rules. And rule number one is never give up. And rule number two is always go back to rule number one.
I
Yeah,
love it. I love it.
yeah. Because of the experience of poverty, we need to not to give up, but to continue and to fill our life with hope. And always pray because, as what I've told you before, prayer is the weakness of God and it is the strength of man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what people need nowadays, not just only to work and work and work. Yeah, we need money, but at the same time, money
Mm-hmm.
cannot save us.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a very nice thing to promote, and I love the way you explained it. The one question I forgot to ask you that I'll just ask before we come to the end, and that is, what brings out the best in you when other people are around you? What's the way that you feel the most comfortable and feel like you can be yourself?
I love one of the talents, the skills that I discover right now is music. And also, I was stationed in a indigenous community. They love like jokes and funny stories.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's my way to share smiles and joys.
And if other people do that for you, that brings out the best in you too?
Yeah, music.
Music. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I have a lot of experience with listening to Filipino choirs, and they're always the best.
thank you.
It's just such a joy of singing that's beyond anything I've ever seen in Canada, even if the groups are technically the same. It's the joy and the enjoyment of music that's beautiful. I'm
Mhm.
glad that you're able to bring that gift to all of those rural communities where you're serving.
Mhm.
So, is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the interview today?
Yeah, I just want to continue a story.
Sure.
In our journey towards the realization of our dreams, the realization of our desires, I always remember the three R's because that was my experience. Three R's. R, R, R. What are those? Number one, some people may reject us. The experience of rejection. Some people may despise you. They will put you down, perhaps of your opinions, of your ethnicity. They will disown you. They will not believe in you. But based on my experience, I was rejected several times in my application before. But don't believe because we are the captain of our own ship because we know the password to our success. In my experience before, when I entered the seminary, I was told, I was not qualified because they're saying priesthood is only for the good looking guys. Priesthood is only for the rich, for the wealth. Priesthood is only for the smart and intelligent people. I am not good looking. I am not rich. I am not smart. But don't believe because we know the password of our success. And if you are like rejected, my second R is like this: always rely to the Lord. Don't rely on your own capacity. Don't rely on your connections, on your possessions, but rely to the Lord. Meaning to say, rely to God, trust Jesus because He is the way, the truth, and the life. Because those who put their trust in the Lord will never be disappointed. And that was in my case. I keep on praying, trusting the Lord. And because of that, the final R, I was rewarded. Because when you rely to the Lord, you will be amazed by the reward of God. The reward is overflowing. It's beyond measure. It's 100-fold. That's why I told you, my motto was, blessings may be delayed, but not denied. That's why to the young people who are listening right now, if you're looking for a partner in life, just better to wait long than to marry wrong.
You are truly the king of quotable quotes and tweetable tweets.
I love that to share in my reflections.
Thank you. That was lovely. And I very much enjoyed this interview. And I wish you much success in your continued service and your continued building of loving relationships with all the people that you're serving. Is there anything else?
Yeah. Thank you, Mary, for having me in your program, and for all your listeners and followers and the subscribers, and also to all my followers in my page. Please don't forget to subscribe and like and share the Culture and Leadership Connection podcast. And as my parting words, I would like to say this word to all your listeners, to all your followers. Do not be afraid to practice your Catholic faith. Do not be ashamed to fulfill your Christian duties. Be proud of your faith. Because as what I've told you, blessings may be delayed, but never denied. And remember Psalm 40 verse 1, and it says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and He heard my cry. Once again, Marie, thank you, and it's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you so much, Father Jhack. Born into a poor farm community in the Philippines, Father Jhack Diaz is the poster boy for overcoming obstacles through faith and perseverance. His sociable life-of-the-party personality, tempered with humility and wisdom, have made him the beloved member of a northern Alberta community so far culturally removed from his experience in the Philippines as to seem impossible. I really enjoyed my interview with Father Jhack and was inspired by his clear principles and memorable acronyms that he uses to help people remember what he is talking about. His faith philosophy is the 3 R's. Don't accept rejection. Remember to pray. And when you do the first 2, you will see results. He explains his life philosophy as 2 points. Number 1, never give up. Number 2, go back to the first point. Given his talent for speaking from the heart and his dramatic flair, you may not be surprised to know that he has a Facebook page with over 10,000 followers and a thriving YouTube channel. Check out the show notes to find the links. You know we depend on ratings and reviews to increase our listenership. So if this episode resonated with you, after sharing it with a friend, please go to lovethepodcast.com/culture and leadership. That's the and sign. To leave a review that automatically recognizes the apps available to you on your phone and links them to make the review process easier. Thank you for listening. And may Culture and Leadership Connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Want to show some appreciation? You can buy me a coffee. What? How do you buy a coffee for a podcast owner? Well, there's a way. Let me explain. You go to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. That's spelled MarieGervais. So it's buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. And when you go to that website, what's going to happen is you'll get a chance to click on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 cups of coffee at $5 a piece to help contribute to the cost of the podcast. And yes, it's $5 for a cup of coffee because it's quality coffee for a quality podcast. So I hope you will contribute and you'll help us to reduce the costs of the podcast by going to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution.